The desert was quiet except for the sound of wind sliding through dry grass and broken rocks. Heat shimmered over the ground, making the air dance like smoke. In that burning stillness, a young Apache girl lay half hidden beside a dry creek bed. Her name was Naya. Dust covered her hair and her face, and her lips were cracked from thirst. She had been running since dawn, trying to escape the men who had attacked her village 2 nights before. Her shoulder still bled where a stray arrow had cut through the skin. Each step she took had become heavier until at last her legs had given out. Now she lay there, weak and trembling, staring at the blue sky that looked like a mirror too far to reach. She tried to move, but pain shot through her arm. Her small bag, filled only with a few seeds and a broken water pouch, had fallen from her hand. The world around her was spinning, the wind whispering through dry bushes. She thought about her family, her brother, Tahoe, who had shouted for her to run. Her mother, who had not made it out. The memory pressed on her heart like a stone. She tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight and her eyelids grew heavy. Far away, a horse's hooves struck the dirt. The sound came closer, steady and strong. A man was riding through the canyon trail, a tall cowboy with sunburned skin and a gray hat pulled low against the light. His name was Luke Carter. He had spent years alone on his small ranch, working the cattle and tending his land. People in town said he preferred horses to humans. He didn't argue. It was true. Since the war and the loss of his family, he had found peace only in silence. That day, he was returning home from the trading post with a sack of flour and a few supplies tied to his saddle. As he guided his horse through the narrow trail, something caught his eye, a faint color against the brown sand. He pulled the reins and his horse slowed. At first, he thought it was a bundle of clothes or a dead animal, but when he rode closer, his heart jumped. It was a girl, still breathing, but barely. Her skin was dry, her hands curled tight, and her shoulder was stained dark with dried blood. He climbed down quickly, kneeling beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" He said softly, but she didn't respond. He touched her wrist. Her pulse was faint. The wind blew sand over her face, and he brushed it away gently. Her eyes flickered open for a moment, meeting his. They were dark, full of fear and confusion. She tried to speak, but only a whisper came, a word he didn't understand, something in her Apache tongue. Luke looked around. There was no sign of anyone else, no camp, no horses, no movement. Just her and the endless desert. He knew what people would say if they found him helping an Apache girl. The settlers still feared the tribes. The soldiers hunted them, but he couldn't walk away. He untied his canteen and lifted her head carefully, pouring a little water between her cracked lips. She swallowed weakly, her breathing steadier for a moment. "You're gonna be all right," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could understand. He had to move fast. The sun was falling lower, and the desert grew colder at night. He looked at his horse, then at the girl again. She was light, too light, when he lifted her in his arms. He wrapped her in his old coat, then placed her carefully across the saddle. With one hand holding her steady, he rode toward his ranch, pushing his horse faster than usual. The trail was rough, winding between cliffs and dry streams. Luke kept glancing down at her, afraid she might stop breathing. She was slipping in and out of consciousness, her lips moving as if she were whispering to someone far away. Once he thought he heard her say her brother's name, Tahoe, but the sound faded with the wind. By the time they reached Luke's ranch, the sky had turned orange and purple. His small cabin stood near the edge of a creek that still held a little water from the last rain. Smoke from his chimney drifted upward, calm and blue. He jumped down from his horse and carried her inside. His cabin was simple, a bed, a table, a fire, and the smell of wood and dust. He laid her gently on the bed and covered her with a blanket. Her wound needed cleaning. He found an old cloth, boiled water, and tore a piece of his shirt into strips. His hands moved carefully as he washed the dried blood away. She flinched when the cool water touched her skin, a faint sound escaping her lips, but she didn't wake. Luke stitched the small cut as best he could with steady hands, the way he had done for wounded horses before. When it was done, he sat back, watching her chest rise and fall. He wondered who she was, how she had ended up alone in the desert. Her face, though tired and thin, was strong. Her jaw set, her brow furrowed even in sleep. He thought about the stories he had heard, Apache raids, lost villages, soldiers fighting over land. But sitting there beside her, she didn't look like an enemy. She looked like a child who had seen too much. As the night deepened, Luke built a small fire in the stone hearth. The flames cast warm light on the wooden walls. He ate a little bread and poured a cup of coffee, though he wasn't hungry. Every few minutes he checked her breathing. Once her eyes opened halfway and she looked at him again. Her voice came soft, almost broken. "Water." He helped her drink, then wiped her forehead. "You're safe," he said quietly. "No one's gonna hurt you here." Her eyes closed again and soon she slept more peacefully. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance and the wind carried the sound away. Luke sat in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He told himself he would take her to the nearest fort once she was better. It was the sensible thing to do. But deep inside, something told him he wouldn't. He stayed awake through most of the night, listening to the fire crackle and her soft breathing. The stars shone through the small window, bright against the black sky. He thought about his own past, the people he'd lost, the loneliness that had filled his ranch for years. Now suddenly there was someone else there, a stranger from a different world, and yet he felt the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. As dawn approached, the desert turned pale gold outside. The first light slipped through the window and touched her face. Luke watched her chest rise slowly, then fall. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. She was alive. He stood and stretched his arms, then looked down at her once more. "You hang in there, girl," he whispered. "You made it this far." He stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting his face. The horizon was endless and calm, the land waking up with color and sound. His horse grazed quietly near the creek, tail flicking at flies. Luke looked back at the cabin. Inside that small wooden house, a girl who should have died in the desert was still breathing. For reasons he couldn't yet explain, he felt that her being there would change something, not just for her, but for him too. The lonely cowboy who had spent years with only the wind for company now had someone to care for, someone who didn't even know his name. The sun climbed higher, spreading warmth over the land. Luke walked back toward the cabin, pushing the door open softly so he wouldn't wake her. The fire was low, but its light still danced across her face. He set his hat on the table, poured water into a cup, and sat down again beside her bed. Outside, the day was beginning, but for Luke Carter, something new had already begun, something he couldn't name yet, but something real. And in that quiet morning, the wounded Apache girl and the lonely cowboy, two souls from worlds that had never meant to meet, lay beneath the same roof and bound by chance, by courage, and by the faint hope that neither of them understood. The next morning, the soft light of dawn touched the walls of Luke's small cabin. The smell of smoke from last night's fire still hung in the air. Luke opened his eyes after a few hours of broken sleep, his back aching from the wooden chair he had sat on all night. He looked toward the bed. The girl was still there, breathing slowly, her face calmer than before. He stood quietly, afraid of waking her, and stepped outside to fetch water from the creek. The air was cool and a light fog covered the fields around his ranch. Birds called from the trees, and the sound of running water brought peace after a long night. Luke knelt beside the creek, filling his tin bucket. His reflection in the water looked tired. Sunburned face, rough beard, eyes that had seen too much silence. He didn't know why he cared so much for the girl inside. He told himself it was just the right thing to do. But deep down he knew there was something more, something he didn't want to admit yet. When he walked back into the cabin, he found her awake. She was sitting up, her eyes alert but cautious. She looked around like someone waking up in a strange place, unsure if she was safe. When she saw Luke standing by the door, she froze. He raised his hand slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe here. No one's gonna hurt you." She looked at him for a long moment, then tried to move her injured arm. Pain shot through her shoulder and she winced. Luke quickly set down the bucket and moved closer. "Easy now," he said. "Don't move too much. You're still hurt." Her dark eyes followed his every motion. She didn't understand all his words, but she could feel that he wasn't dangerous. Still, fear stayed in her eyes, the kind of fear that takes time to fade. Luke took a small bowl, filled it with water, and handed it to her. "Drink," he said, motioning with his hand. She hesitated, then took the bowl with both hands and drank slowly. The water cooled her dry throat. "Thank you," she whispered in a soft, shaky voice. Her accent was strong and her English was broken, but he understood. "You can speak English?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Little, only little." Luke smiled a bit. "That's good enough." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked softly, and outside, the horse snorted near the fence. Luke took a piece of bread from the table, broke it in half, and offered her some. She took it carefully and ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. After she finished, she touched the bandage on her shoulder. "You have fixed this?" she asked. "Yeah," Luke replied. "You were bleeding bad when I found you." She looked down as if remembering something painful. Her voice trembled when she said, "Men, came fire, my people run. I fall." Luke's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. He had heard stories of soldiers raiding Apache camps, of people being driven from their land. Now one of those stories was sitting in his bed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're safe here now." Her eyes lifted to his again, studying his face, searching for truth. "You no tell soldiers?" Luke shook his head firmly. "No. No one needs to know you're here." She watched him carefully as if testing his words. Then she nodded and leaned back, her body still weak. Her eyelids fluttered closed again, but her breathing stayed calm. Luke spent the rest of the morning tending to his chores. He fed the horse, chopped wood, and checked the fences. But his thoughts kept going back to the girl inside the cabin. Every time he heard a small sound, he found himself glancing toward the door. By noon, she was awake again, watching through the small window as he worked outside. When he came back in, she spoke softly. "Your name?" He paused, surprised by her question. "Luke," he said after a moment. "Luke Carter." She repeated it slowly, trying to form the sound right. "Luke." Then she pointed at herself. "Naya," Luke nodded. "Naya," he said, testing the name. It felt right, strong and gentle at the same time. A faint smile touched her lips, the first he had seen. For the rest of the day, he stayed close, making sure she had water and rest. When evening came, the sky turned gold and he lit the fire again. She sat up, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes following the flames. Luke sat in the chair beside her. "You got any family left?" he asked quietly. She hesitated before answering. "Brother. Maybe alive. I don't know." Her voice cracked a little. "I'd try find him." Luke stared at the fire. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, but he couldn't promise that. The West was harsh and people went missing all the time. "Still," he said softly, "you'll find him. You just need to get your strength back first." Naya nodded, though her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. A few moments passed in silence before Luke spoke again. "If anyone from town comes around, you stay quiet, all right? Some of them don't take kindly to strangers." She frowned, not fully understanding. "They hate my people?" Luke sighed. "Some do. They don't understand. But I won't let them hurt you." She looked at him with a strange mix of surprise and trust. No one outside her tribe had ever said words like that to her. That night, Luke lay down on a blanket near the door, letting her have the bed. The stars were bright through the small window, and the night wind made the fire flicker. Naya couldn't sleep. She watched the man who had saved her. His steady breathing, his worn boots by the door, the hat hanging from the wall. He looked like the kind of man who carried heavy memories. She didn't know why he helped her, but she felt something shift inside her. Something warm, something that reminded her of safety. In the middle of the night, a noise outside startled them both. Luke sat up quickly, grabbing his rifle. He motioned for her to stay quiet. The sound came from near the barn, a horse neighing, then footsteps in the dirt. Luke moved silently to the window and peeked out. 2 men on horseback were approaching the gate, carrying lanterns. He recognized them, ranchers from town. He turned back to Naya and whispered, "Don't move. Don't make a sound." She nodded, fear tightening her face. Luke stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him. The men stopped their horses when they saw him. "Evenin', Luke," one of them said. "Heard some trouble up north? Indians on the move again." "You seen anything?" Luke kept his expression calm. "Ain't seen nobody," he said. "Just me and my horse out here." The man squinted. "You sure?" "We found tracks not far from here." "Looked fresh," Luke shrugged. "Could be wild horses, or maybe some traveler lost his way." The men looked past him toward the cabin. One pointed. "You alone in there?" Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Yeah, you think I got time for guests out here?" The men exchanged glances, then nodded slowly. "All right," one said. "Just keep your eyes open. Folks say the Apaches are stealing cattle again." Luke's tone stayed even. "I'll keep watch." They rode off, their lanterns swinging in the dark. Luke waited until the sound of their horses faded before going back inside. Naya was sitting up, clutching the blanket, her eyes wide. "They gone," he said softly, setting his rifle down. "You're safe." She exhaled shakily, her body relaxing. "You lie for me," she said. Luke nodded. "Had to. They wouldn't understand." For the first time, she looked straight into his eyes. "Thank you, Luke," he smiled faintly. "Get some rest now. We'll talk more in the morning." When he sat down by the fire again, his heart felt strange. Not heavy, not lonely, but full in a quiet way. The desert wind outside moved through the grass, whispering softly against the walls. Inside, two people who came from different worlds shared the same silence, one that didn't need words to mean something. The sun climbed slowly over the ridge, painting the land in soft gold. Luke was already outside when Naya woke. He was fixing the fence near the barn, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hat pulled low against the light. From the window she watched him work, his movement steady and sure. For the first time in many days, she felt safe enough to breathe without fear. The air smelled of grass and smoke, and the sound of running water from the creek filled the silence between them. When she tried to sit up, her shoulder hurt, but it was better than before. The bandage felt tight and her body was still weak, yet her spirit was stronger. She looked around the small cabin again. Everything was simple. Wooden walls, a small table, a chair, and the warm light of a morning fire. She touched the edge of the blanket he had wrapped around her, and a strange feeling filled her chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something softer, something she didn't have a word for. Luke came in with a small bucket of milk from the cow outside. When he saw her sitting up, his face softened. "You're up early," he said. She smiled faintly. "You work much," she said in her broken English. He chuckled quietly. "Out here, if you don't work, you don't eat." He poured the milk into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it carefully, nodding her thanks. After she drank, Luke set a small plate of bread and dried fruit on the table. "You should eat more," he said. "You'll heal faster." She nodded and began eating slowly. Between bites, she looked at him and asked, "Why you help me?" Luke paused, thinking about his answer. "I couldn't leave you there," he said finally. "Wouldn't have been right." Naya tilted her head. "Many men leave. They hate my people." Luke stared at the fire for a long moment. "Not all men are the same," he said quietly. "And I've seen enough hate to know it don't fix anything." She looked at him, trying to understand every word. Then she nodded, her dark eyes softening. "You good man," she said gently. Luke gave a small smile, but he didn't reply. He wasn't used to praise, and her words touched something in him he didn't expect. Later that morning, she asked to go outside. Luke hesitated, worried her wound might reopen, but he could see the restlessness in her eyes. So he helped her up and guided her to the doorway. The bright sunlight made her blink at first, but soon she smiled at the open sky. It stretched wide and endless above them, the desert hills glowing in shades of gold and red. She took a slow breath, feeling the wind brush her face. "Beautiful," she whispered. Luke nodded beside her. "It is, but it can turn cruel fast. This land don't forgive mistakes." She looked at him, her voice low. "Like people." He met her eyes and nodded again. "Like people." For a while, they stood in silence, just watching the land. Then Luke led her to a wooden bench by the stable. His dog, an old brown mutt named Rusty, wandered over and sniffed her hand. She laughed softly, the sound light and shy. "He friendly," she said. "Only to the ones he likes," Luke replied with a grin. As the days passed, Naya grew stronger. She helped around the cabin, folding cloths, sweeping the floor, or washing small things in the creek. Luke tried to tell her she didn't need to work, but she insisted. "In my tribe," she said, "to live we must give something back." Sometimes he would catch her singing in her own language by the water. The tune was soft, full of sadness and memory. He didn't understand the words, but he could feel their meaning. It reminded him of old times, when his wife used to hum by the fire before the sickness took her away. One evening, while the sky turned orange, Naya helped him feed the horse. She watched carefully as he brushed its mane and talked softly to it. "Horse, listen to you," she said. Luke smiled. "Animals understand kindness better than people sometimes." She nodded thoughtfully. "Yes. In my home, we say the horse has two hearts, one for itself, one for the one who rides it." He looked at her curiously. "That's a fine way to see it." Their eyes met for a moment longer than usual. Then she looked away, blushing faintly. You miss someone, she said quietly. I see in your eyes. Luke's hand froze on the horse's reins. He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, I did. Long time ago. She didn't ask more, but the silence between them said enough. It was a gentle silence, not an empty one. The next few days were peaceful, but trouble never stayed away for long in the West. Late one afternoon, as Luke was cutting wood, he saw dust rising far off on the trail. 2 riders were coming. His stomach tightened. He knew the ranchers had been patrolling more often since word spread of attacks up north. He went inside and told Naya quickly, You need to hide. Her eyes widened. Again? He nodded. They won't understand, Naya, please. She hesitated, then slipped quietly behind the curtain that hid the small storage area near the back. He could hear her breathing softly as he opened the door. The riders stopped near the fence. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, tipped his hat. Afternoon, Luke, we heard some Apache signs down this way. You seen anything? Luke leaned against the doorway, calm but alert. No, just me and my stock. The man's eyes narrowed. You sure? We found footprints not far from your land. Small ones. Luke's heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. Could be coyotes. You boys see shadows in every rock. The other man, younger and meaner looking, spat in the dirt. You'd best be careful who you're talking to. These ain't friendly times. Luke crossed his arms. Ain't looking for friends. I'm just looking to mind my own land. The older man laughed coldly. Always the loner, huh? Just make sure you ain't hiding any trouble, Luke. They turned their horses and rode off slowly, but Luke didn't move until the sound of hooves faded into the distance. When he finally shut the door, he let out a long breath. Naya came out from hiding, her eyes full of worry. They come again? Maybe, Luke said, rubbing his face. They don't trust anyone they can't control, she frowned. Why they hate so easy? He looked at her sadly. Because they don't know what it's like to lose everything. You only learn kindness when life breaks you first. Her gaze softened. You know this, she said quietly. Luke met her eyes and nodded. Yeah, I do. That night they sat by the fire again. The air outside was cool, and the stars were bright through the window. Naya watched the flames flicker, her thoughts far away. When I strong, she said suddenly, I'd go find my brother. He maybe need me. Luke felt his chest tighten. He had known this moment would come. Still, the words hit him harder than he expected. You think he's still alive? I feel, she said, touching her heart. He alive here. Luke smiled faintly. Then we'll find him. I'll help you, her eyes widened. You help me? Sure, he said. I got a horse, some maps, and more food than I can eat alone. She stared at him for a moment, then whispered, You kind, Luke. Too kind. He laughed softly. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't like seeing good people lost. Naya smiled. A real smile this time. The kind that reached her eyes. For the first time since she'd been found in the desert, she didn't feel alone anymore. As the firelight danced across the walls, she whispered something in Apache, a few short words that Luke couldn't understand. But her voice was full of warmth, like a blessing. What did you say? He asked. She looked at him and said, It means, I thank the spirits for sending me where I could live again. Luke looked at her quietly, the glow of the fire reflected in his eyes. Guess the spirits knew what they were doing, he said softly. Outside, the wind moved through the dry grass, carrying the faint sound of the creek. Inside the small cabin, 2 lonely souls sat side by side, the space between them shrinking with every heartbeat. Neither spoke for a long while. They didn't have to. The silence said everything. The morning came quiet and clear. The air was cool, and the first light touched the hills with a soft golden glow. Luke stepped out of the cabin, stretching his arms after a long night. He could still hear Naya's soft breathing inside. She had fallen asleep near the fire again, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. He smiled faintly as he looked at the horizon. Somehow his ranch didn't feel so empty anymore. He went about his chores as he always did, feeding the horse, gathering eggs, and mending the fence. But his mind kept drifting back to her. Each day she seemed stronger, her steps steadier, her eyes brighter. The fear that once shadowed her face had slowly been replaced by quiet determination. When he came back inside, she was awake, sitting near the table. She had braided her dark hair and was holding a small wooden carving she had made from a scrap piece of wood. It looked like a bird in flight. She smiled when she saw him. "For you," she said softly, offering it to him. Luke looked at it, surprised. "You made this?" She nodded proudly. "My father teach me when I little, he say, to make something with your hands is to keep your spirit alive." Luke took the carving and turned it in his hand. The wings were rough but full of care. "It's beautiful, Naya," he said. "Thank you." She smiled shyly and looked down. "You saved my life. I make you this so you remember I not forget." He didn't know what to say for a moment. "You don't have to repay me," he said gently. "I didn't help you for thanks." "I know," she said quietly. "That why it mean more." After breakfast, they worked together outside. Naya insisted on helping even though her shoulder still hurt sometimes. Luke showed her how to milk the cow, how to patch small holes in the fence, and how to gather kindling for the fire. She was quick to learn, and her laughter began to fill the quiet spaces around the ranch. At noon, the two of them sat under the shade of an old oak tree near the creek. Luke handed her an apple, and they watched the clouds drift lazily across the blue sky. "You been here long time?" she asked. "About 10 years, he said. "Bought this land after the war. Wanted a place where nobody told me what to do." She nodded. "You alone all time?" He gave a half smile, mostly. "Guess I got used to it." She studied his face for a moment. "You lonely?" she said simply. Luke looked away, his jaw tightening slightly. "Maybe, but I've had my peace here. Don't need much more." She didn't argue, but her eyes were soft with understanding. She could see in him the same kind of emptiness she once carried, the kind that comes from losing too much and trusting too little. That evening, while Luke fixed a broken gate, Naya went down to the creek to wash some clothes. The sound of water running over stones was peaceful. She hummed a soft tune, one she remembered her mother singing long ago. For a moment she could almost see her family again. The warm light of the fire, her brother's laughter, her mother's gentle hands. A tear slipped down her cheek before she wiped it away. Suddenly she heard something, a snapping branch. Her heart jumped. She looked up and saw movement near the trees, 2 men on horseback watching from a distance. She froze. One of them pointed toward her. Without thinking, she dropped the clothes and ran toward the cabin. "Luke," she called, breathless. He turned quickly, seeing her running up the hill. Behind her, 2 men were riding closer, dust rising behind their horses. Luke's stomach sank. He recognized them, the same men who had come asking questions before. He grabbed his rifle from the porch and stood firm as the riders approached. "Afternoon again, Luke," the older one said with a smirk. "Didn't think we'd find company out here." His eyes flicked toward Naya, who stood behind Luke, trembling but defiant. "That looks like one of them Apache girls, don't it?" Luke kept his rifle lowered but ready. "She's hurt. She ain't a threat to nobody." The man spat on the ground. "Don't matter. Law says any Indian found off the reservation gets taken in." Luke's voice hardened. "She's not going anywhere with you." The younger man laughed coldly. "You hiding her, Carter? Gonna risk your neck for one of them?" Luke didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on them. "She's under my roof. That means she's my responsibility. You want her? You'll have to go through me." The older man's smile faded. For a moment no one spoke. The wind blew across the dry grass, carrying dust between them. Then the man said, "We'll be back, Luke, and next time we won't come talking." They turned their horses and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind. Luke stood there for a long time, staring after them. Naya stepped closer, her voice shaking. "They come back?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, and they'll bring more." She looked at him, guilt in her eyes. "I bring trouble, I go." "You safe?" Luke turned to her sharply. "No, you're not going anywhere." "But, no," he interrupted firmly. "You wouldn't make it 2 miles before they found you. This land's full of people who shoot first and ask later. You stay here until I figure something out." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. She knew he was right. That night, neither of them slept much. Luke sat by the fire, his rifle across his lap, listening for sounds outside. Naya sat quietly near the window, staring out at the dark hills. The stars shone bright, but they gave her no comfort. Finally, she spoke softly. "You risk life for me, why?" Luke looked at her, the firelight flickering across his face. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "You didn't deserve what happened, and I'm not going to let them take you away just because the world's cruel." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "No one ever protected me before." "Not like this," Luke smiled faintly. "Well, there's a first time for everything." The silence that followed was warm this time. They didn't need to say more. In the days that followed, Luke prepared in secret. He fixed an old wagon, packed food, water, and a few supplies. He planned to take Naya to the mountains, far from the reach of angry men. She helped him quietly, her eyes full of both fear and trust. One morning as the sun rose, she came to him with a small piece of fabric, red and brown, decorated with beads. She tied it around his wrist. "This protect you," she said. "My mother make it. She say it keep heart strong." Luke looked down at it, touched. "Then I'll wear it with pride," he said. They left at dawn the next day. The wagon creaked down the dirt trail, the horse moving slow but steady. The land around them was wide and empty, the wind carrying the smell of sagebrush. Naya sat beside him, her hair tied back, her face calm but watchful. Luke kept one hand on the reins and one on his rifle. Every sound made him glance toward the hills. After hours of silence, Naya spoke softly. "You think they follow?" Luke looked at the horizon. "If they do, we'll be ready." As the sun began to set, they stopped near a dry canyon and set up a small fire. The light danced across the rocks and the sound of crickets filled the air. For the first time in many days, Naya smiled again. "You trust stars?" she asked, pointing upward. Luke followed her gaze. "Used to. When I was a boy, my father told me the stars watched over good people. My people say same," she said quietly. "When someone help another, the stars remember." Luke looked at her then, her face glowing in the firelight. "Guess we'll give them something to remember tonight," he said softly. She smiled, her eyes shining like the stars above. For a moment, the fear, the danger, and the pain of their past disappeared. There was only the calm of the desert night, and two hearts that had somehow found each other in a world full of dust and sorrow. The fire burned low, and Luke threw another stick into the flames. Naya rested her head against the wagon wheel, her eyes closing. Luke watched her for a while, his heart heavy but steady. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let her face it alone. The night passed quietly, but Luke did not sleep much. The stars above the canyon were bright, and the wind carried the faint smell of dust and sage. He sat near the small fire, watching over Naya as she slept beside the wagon. Every sound in the distance made him reach for his rifle, but nothing came close. It was a lonely, peaceful kind of silence, the kind that felt like the land itself was holding its breath. When morning came, he stirred the fire and boiled a small pot of coffee. Naya woke slowly, her eyes blinking against the new light. She sat up, brushing dust from her blanket, and smiled faintly when she saw him. "You not sleep," she said softly. Luke smiled back. Someone had to keep watch. She looked at the wide sky and the empty horizon. "We far now?" he nodded. "Far enough that they'll think twice before following." They ate what little food they had, dry bread and a few apples. Naya fed a small piece to the horse, patting its neck gently. "Good horse," she murmured. "Strong heart." Luke watched her, smiling to himself. "You talk to animals like they understand every word." She looked at him seriously. "They do. If you speak with kindness, they listen." He chuckled softly. "Maybe you're right." After they packed their things, they started moving again. The trail wound between red cliffs and open plains. The air grew warmer as the sun rose higher, but a light wind kept them cool. Naya sat beside Luke, holding the edge of her blanket around her shoulders. Sometimes she looked at the hills as if she was searching for something familiar. As the day went on, they passed through an old canyon where a stream ran faintly through the rocks. Luke stopped the wagon and said, "We'll rest here a bit." Naya stepped down carefully, her bare feet touching the warm earth. She walked to the stream and knelt to touch the water. It was cold and clear. For a while, she stayed quiet, just listening to the sound of the wind and the trickling stream. Then she said softly, "This place feel like home. My people used to come to places like this. For peace. For prayers." Luke joined her, sitting on a rock beside the water. "You miss them, don't you?" She nodded, her eyes distant. "Every day. But I think maybe spirits lead me here for reason." She turned her head toward him. "Maybe I not find my brother yet, but I find someone who keep me safe." Luke looked down, his voice gentle. "Maybe you found more than that." Their eyes met for a long moment, full of things that didn't need words. Then Luke stood and cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We should keep moving before the sun gets too high." They traveled for hours that day, climbing through rough trails and narrow passes. By afternoon, they reached a small valley filled with grass and a few scattered trees. It was quiet, hidden from the main road, and Luke knew it was a good place to rest for the night. As he unhitched the horse and set up camp, Naya walked among the trees. She found a branch shaped like a bow and began carving it carefully with Luke's knife. When he saw what she was doing, he asked, "Making something again?" She smiled. "A gift. For Journey." When she was done, she handed him the small bow carved with simple symbols. "For luck," she said. "When you feel lost, remember this moment." Luke took it slowly, his voice low. "I'll remember." That evening, as the sun began to set, they built another small fire. The colors in the sky turned from gold to pink, then deep red. Naya sat close to the flames, humming softly. Luke watched her, feeling a strange calm settle in his chest. For so long, his life had been empty, a cycle of work, silence, and loneliness. Now somehow, this young woman from a world so different from his had changed everything without even trying. After a long pause, he spoke quietly. "When you find your brother, what will you do?" She looked into the fire. "We go back to the hills. My people rebuild. We live again. Maybe I teach children songs of peace." Luke smiled faintly. "That sounds right." Then she looked at him, her voice softer. "And you, Luke? You go back to your ranch?" He sighed. "Maybe, but it won't feel the same anymore." She tilted her head. "Why?" He hesitated, searching for words. "Because when you've been alone too long, you start thinking that's all life has to give. Then someone comes along and reminds you that maybe you still got something left worth feeling." Naya didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "You good man, Luke Carter," she said finally. "My people say when two hearts share kindness, they become one in memory. Even if they far apart later, they still walk under same sky." Luke nodded slowly. "I'll hold on to that." The next morning, before dawn, Luke was woken by the sound of hooves. He sat up quickly, hand on his rifle. Dust rose in the distance, 3 riders coming fast. He cursed under his breath and turned to Naya. "They found us." Her eyes widened, but she didn't panic. Luke grabbed his rifle, checked his bullets, and said, "Get behind the wagon. Stay low." The riders drew closer, shouting something he couldn't make out. Luke fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the canyon. "Turn around," he yelled. "You don't belong here." But they didn't stop. One of the men lifted his gun and fired back, the bullet striking the dirt near Luke's feet. He ducked and fired again, hitting the man's hat clean off. The riders pulled their horses hard, realizing Luke wasn't bluffing. After a tense moment, they turned and rode off, disappearing over the ridge. When the dust settled, Luke lowered his rifle. His hands trembled slightly from the rush. Naya came running to him. "You not hurt?" He shook his head. "No, but they won't stop for long. We need to move again." They packed quickly, leaving behind the ashes of the fire. The horse trotted steadily, pulling the wagon through the canyon. Hours passed before they finally reached a hidden valley, surrounded by cliffs and wild grass. Luke stopped the wagon and looked around. "This'll do," he said. "No one will find us here." Naya climbed down, looking at the valley with awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luke smiled. "It's yours for as long as you need it." They built a small shelter with wood and blankets, and over the next few days, peace returned. The air was cooler, and water from a nearby spring kept them alive. Luke hunted small game, and Naya gathered herbs and berries she recognized from her homeland. Together they built a quiet rhythm that felt almost like a life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cliffs, Naya sat by the fire, her face glowing in the soft light. "When I go," she said quietly, "you be alone again." Luke looked at her for a long time before answering. "Maybe, but I won't be the same man I was before." She smiled gently. "Then my journey not for nothing." He chuckled softly. "No, it wasn't for nothing." That night the stars shone brighter than ever. Naya sat beside the fire, singing softly in her language. Luke listened, eyes half closed, the melody wrapping around him like a warm blanket. It was a song of peace, of life after pain, of spirits that walk with the wind. The next morning, when she was ready to leave, Luke saddled the horse for her. She carried only a small pack and a handmade spear. "Your brother's out there somewhere," he said. "You'll find him." She looked up at him, her eyes full of emotion. "You saved me, Luke. I never forget." He took her hand gently. "You changed me, Naya. That's something I won't forget either." For a moment they stood in silence, the wind moving softly between them. Then she mounted the horse, her figure framed by the rising sun. "Goodbye, Luke Carter," she said softly. "Goodbye, Naya," he replied. She rode away slowly, the sound of hooves fading across the plain. Luke stood there until she disappeared over the ridge. Then he looked down at the small red-beaded bracelet still tied around his wrist and smiled sadly. Days turned into weeks. Luke returned to his ranch, and though the land looked the same, it felt different. Sometimes at night he would step outside, look at the stars, and remember her voice, her laughter, her courage. And somewhere, far beyond the hills, he knew she was looking at the same sky, whispering her thanks to the spirits. The cowboy and the Apache girl had crossed paths by fate, two lives bound for a brief time under the endless western sky. They had saved each other in ways neither could explain, and though their roads parted, the memory of that bond lived on, like the quiet echo of a song carried by the wind across the desert.